All right, so pull out your 11 by 14 paper and pull out your Prismacolor. We're going to jump back to the pencil here. You know what? We're gonna race on this one. We're gonna see if we can do this one fast, so fast as to which you could do your redo before 4 o'clock too. Let's see if you can knock out 2 of them. 2 of these drawings should you need a second before 4. 1 hour. I think we can over-labor these things a little bit. I know I can, so maybe we should speed up, go fast. Sometimes it actually comes out better that way. All right. Let's hold it down a little bit. Hold out. We're not too much further away. All right, real quickly, let's talk about washer and dryers here. Big box. Large box. Slightly vertical box. Let's look at a couple of different ones here. Slightly vertical box. So it's not far off of a cube, but it's a little taller than a cube, right? And let me clarify, we're talking about front loader washer and dryers, not top loaders. I'm still a top loader guy, as you would expect. We got top loaders at our house still, but most of us have front loaders these days, and there are pros and cons to that, actually. I've learned a lot about front loaders the last couple of years. But we need to build a box that's a little bit more vertical than a cube. The footprint of this box, though, is very squarish, very square-like. So I really don't have a straight down view, but if I'm looking at the width versus the depth, it's going to be pretty close to a square. So it's almost like you took a square, and if we're looking at this one and we say that the height of that cube is right in here, well, we're probably adding another third, maybe quarter to the height of that cube. So that's kind of what we're thinking of doing. I tell you what, I think Jared suggested we draw this particular model or something close to this. So we'll stick with this particular shot here to kind of indicate. One of the things that he thought would be nice to include, he really liked the way the door bezel works on here. In other words, there is, let me see if I can sketch it on the actual photograph where you can kind of see it here a little bit. So if I was to draw a contour line, let me do this with a pen. If I was to draw a contour line on the center line of this, it would come up, it would step in right there where that notch is, it would come up again, it would step in again, come forward, and then it would come at an angle. This is a chamfered bezel here. Do you see that slight angle that it's got on it? And then it's going to kick back in. So there's like another chamfer. So these are angled revolves essentially on this door. And if I'm carrying that line on up, it's going to kick back out. And then it's going to kick slightly back and then wrap over and come center line all the way back up. So I draw that line to kind of give you an indication. That's called a contour line. It's not a line that's actually in our product, but sometimes we draw lines like that to give us a sense of what the form is doing. And typically we would do a contour line as a construction line. I drew it dark there just to kind of show the shape a little bit. Does that make sense? Okay, as a starting point, that's kind of what we're shooting for. But we're not going to draw them stacked on one on top of each other like this. We're going to draw something that looks like this model, but we're going to draw it from a viewpoint that's a little bit more like this. So left to right, kind of from a perspective not far off of that, okay? So that's what we're going to aim for. Let's see if we can do it, and let's see if we can do it quickly. 2, washer and dryer, side by side. Yep. Washer and dryer. When I said draw 2, I meant let's finish this drawing in 30 minutes so that you could do a redo of it in 30 minutes before you get back to your tech. That's what I meant by 2. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to try to leave this up a little bit in the corner to reference a little bit, maybe over here if I can, if it doesn't get too much in my way. But again, actually, first of all, I'm just going to start out. See if I can zoom back out a little bit. There we go. I'm going to start out by building my perspective line off the page, vanishing points off the page, and try to fill as much as you can and try to use this as lightly as you can, because this is going to be a lot of lines to try to keep light. And then I'm going to do a vertical line right here. That's my front corner. I'm not as imaginative as Jared with my perspective viewpoints. You'll find almost every one of them starts the same way. I kind of keep the perspective more or less almost equal. And I'm going to go ahead. We need to be looking down on this a little bit. Not too much, but a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and set a height. Let me go a little bigger. I'm going to go a little bit bigger still. I'm going to set a height for this cube to be maybe somewhere in here. I'm trying to get a sense of how much space I have. I probably should have slid this over a little more. I'm going to go higher still. And I'm going to sweep off one way, sweep off the other way. Is that what I want? No, that's not what I want. Not at all. Let's get it a little bit more strong perspective over here. I didn't quite hit that line right. Didn't hit that line right either. But I'm going to keep going here. I got to get my depth going, and I know again that this is it's taller than it is deep a little bit. So I'm going to step back a little bit here and see what that looks like. Is that too deep? I think that's just a bit too deep. I'm going to come forward a little bit more. Get a little bit taller and thinner. And so that becomes kind of the back of my, let's say, I guess it'd be my washer, is it usually on the left side. So my washer I'm drawing right now. I'm going to go ahead and strike this over. Remember to get convergence right here. This is tough on these long flat lines. To get that long convergence can be a little bit difficult, but get that line working all the way across. And then I'm going to step back over on this side and again kind of go vertical again. See what I get. I still feel like this left side is too deep, especially now that I've drawn the right side here. I feel that left side is just a little bit too deep. I guess I could open up this side, but I think I got to pull more off the back of this. I just don't have the proportions right yet. So I'm going to keep going light, keep moving that forward, keep bringing that back line forward a little bit. It's a long line to draw right there, folks. I'm having a hard time with it too, all the way across. I'll firm it up a little bit later. It's almost looking more shaded right now. And I can quickly use my diagonal method. This is going to come in handy in just a second when I start to play with those front doors. I can use my diagonal method here or on the front to get a sense of that next unit and how wide that needs to be. So I'm going to come through here and I'm going to drop a vertical from there. Let's see, am I there yet? What do y'all think? Proportions still feels deep over here to me on the left side. The right actually feels pretty close to me, but the left, this just feels deep. Feels like this ought to shave on back even more than what I have. So I'm going to fix it. I can still fix it. I'm going to come way back. Let's just make a big jump here and see if I can get there. And I think that's looking better already. That's probably where I needed to be. So I'll bring that line up. This becomes my new corner. I'll put a little corner there. You know, sometimes this is a neat little trick with the Prismacolor, and you can do this with a pen too, is when you start getting maybe a few too many lines going on, and it does happen right here. I got a lot going on that's not quite right. Very few of that is correct. I come in and hit just a little darker. Once I actually do have the depth I like, just hit me a little a little bit of a round corner there, a little tick mark. It kind of clarifies where corner actually is. It can get a little, you see how minor that is? Even that's not that committal, but it's like it gives me this little reference area. I could also hit one out here, but this one's pretty easy to see right now. When it gets hard to see, sometimes I do that. Now I need to make sure that these lines are dropping back and converging this way too, because they're running back towards that other vanishing point. And I've got one here in the middle, actually two here in the middle too. Make sure they're bisecting each other and not just going off randomly. I was looking at y'all's, I've been upstairs grading your irregular shapes drawings from yesterday. They're rough, folks. I just got to tell you, those are rough. Y'all did, I think, a whole lot better on the chairs than you did that irregular shape and plotting and wrapping the points. A lot of you just ignored the plotting and the wrapping, and then some of you just really struggled, I think, with the perspective going off the page. But anyways, make sure you get those that are converging. I'm going to go ahead and put a little gap there. Kind of represents, kind of fudged it a little bit because technically that ought to be, I didn't really give myself room. I kind of went a little bit to either side of that. But I'm liking the proportions. I'm pretty close now, I think, on the general proportions. But make sure you get it right. It's worth spending that time. What else do I need here? Well, I've got this large ellipse, or series of ellipses I'm going to have to draw. Also have a control panel that's kind of the top quarter of this thing, it looks like. And interestingly enough, this control panel actually bisects where the ellipse is. That's kind of an interesting design detail. Typically, it would be above that. If I look at this other design over here, you know, their control panel goes completely above that ellipse. But the one we're doing is a little different, and I like the look of this one better. So we're going to do that. I'm going to go ahead for reference and put that control panel line in. That's such an easy line to do. I'm just going to eyeball it and come down about a quarter on that front face and draw a line straight across. And go on and take two at a time here. Save yourself some effort by drawing that line across the dryer as well. Some of these lines you'll have to do one at a time, but when you can knock two out at a time with one strike like that, go ahead and do it. So I got that line for that control panel on. Wow. I think I'm ready to take that ellipse on. I'm sitting here looking. I could go in and put details in, but you know what? Let's take on the worst first here, and that ellipse is the big challenge. So let's do it. First step, I got to find where center point is on this glass, this piece of glass. Now, why the glass first? Well, the glass, what you see is black right here, is actually on the same plane or very close to the same plane as the front of the dryer. You'll notice that the bezel steps forward. It's proud, right, of the surface of the dryer. But the glass is pretty close to the surface I've already drawn here. So it becomes really a good way of sighting or placing that first ellipse. Yeah, because I've got a center line, a center point here. What do you think? Do you think, where is that door placed relative to the total height of the dryer and washer? Where is that center point right there relative to the total height?
I think it's midway through it.
Maybe just a hair above it. It's close to midway, but it's not much. Do what?
16th higher.
A 16th higher, maybe? Okay, so we don't have to be super accurate. We just have to look at where midpoint is here and just go a little above it. And I'm going to go ahead and draw, because I don't really have a vertical here, but a vertical would help me sight a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and put a vertical line there, and I'm going to go ahead and just mark. I think I'm going to put my center line right about where that dot is. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's close. I might even drawn it too high, maybe a little bit lower than that. If I look at this door again, I'm thinking, all right, let's give ourselves some guides. I'm going to freehand these ellipses. We're not doing templates. We're not doing, honestly, chord method we might use here to check with, but honestly, we're just going to try to make it look right. So how do we judge how wide this is. Looks like, we already know it comes above and bisects that panel a little bit, but it looks like it leaves actually just a little margin left and right. And so I'm going to come out here and put that. I'm going to go ahead and just give myself some margin. Say, all right, let's say right in here, and this is off the corner, right in here is where that ellipse will end. And I could come over here and wrap that diagonal around and find that exactly. I guess I could. Let's just do it real lightly and quickly here. I could wrap where that thickness is and bring it over, and that actually tells me where the margin of the other side is going to be. So I am kind of almost building a little bit of a box, not really a total box, but enough of one to get a sense of how big this is going to be. So that when I start freehanding, I got a little bit of a guide to start to look at. And most important of all, what is the most important line you have to find to put an ellipse in perspective? The minor axis, absolutely. And where is that minor axis going to be? To the left vanishing point. You got it right. Right through that center. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that. I know I need that. And I'm going to do a nice big one here that I can sight, that I see it. I don't want to miss it. Because this is a hard ellipse to draw right here. What we're about to do freehand is really tough. And any line I can have to get to sight with, that's a good one too. I split that sucker right down the convergence right there. So that's going to do me well. And I can see that, and I can see a little bit of my borders here, the edges that it's going to hit. I know it's going to come up to a little bit. Well, I guess actually, yeah, it's going to, I may have drawn that a little bit too big. I guess technically, no, this isn't based on a square. This isn't based on a square. So I can go ahead and sight the top of this ellipse. It's going to bisect and come into that panel a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and sight that too. That gives me a little line there. Technically, I could do the same thing, kind of coming equidistant down on the bottom. And I think I'm going to do that to help me a little bit. Do you see what I'm doing? I'm not really measuring anything. I'm just kind of giving myself tick marks. This one is equidistant here, dropped one down. And that gives me a little bit to look at as I'm kind of watching this. But here's the thing, when you draw these freehand ellipses with a Prismacolor or even a pen, it's like Jared said, you ghost first. You kind of watch where your hand is, where that lead is gonna fall, and you try to get the circular motion working right before you drop that pencil down, and then you don't worry about it. You keep the pencil down and just hold it down and very lightly try to keep working it. And it's gonna take several passes to get it right, but I'm definitely gonna rotate this thing where I'm looking and I'm sighting down that minor axis. I'm watching these 4 points, and I'm gonna try to create an ellipse that hits kind of tangency on these 4 points, but realizing that the shortest distance is going to be right about here to right about here, right? That's the minor axis. And it's going to feel weird, but I'm going to start doing it. I didn't quite hit it yet. Didn't quite get out to this edge.
Is this for the outer?
This is actually going to end up being the outer kind of seam that you see here, the clearance between the door and that, because it ends up being on about the same plane as that glass, and the front face is right there. So yeah, you're right. This is the outer part. I didn't quite hit the back side of that ellipse quite like I want, so I'm going to actually just rotate my paper and try to kind of fill it back in, kind of fill this a little bit. I missed it right there. And some of this is going to disappear behind what I still have left to draw, so I didn't quite go big enough, I think. I think I kind of went a little bit small. But I'm going to stick with it. A little bit small maybe, but, and that's still really light. I'm still in my 10% on this thing. I have not, the darkest point on this page is that little tick mark I put back here, and that's at about 50%. So I've got stab at my ellipse that is my seam, that is my joint between my door and my front housing. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. There's different ways to approach this, but if I look at the next ellipse I want to draw is really this leading edge right here, this step up to this chamfer. And that's a little trickier because the degree is going to be the same. The minor axis is going to be shared. But honestly, it's going to be shifted forward a little bit closer in this dimension, right? So I got to somehow move it forward, almost like an offset plane coming out. I don't know, what is it, 2-3 inches from the front face of that? I can't just draw it over the top. It's not an offset on that same surface. It's offsetting this surface in that Z direction. So there's different ways to kind of look at that and feel that. What I think I'm going to do, this is a little unorthodox here, but I'm going to come out to this corner, this edge where the actual door is hitting the. Might put some points there to let me see this right here, and I'm going to estimate this by drawing another line to that vanishing point, pulling it forward, and bringing it out a thickness that looks like what that thickness of that door is. Which is, maybe something like this, and creating that plane, kind of creating in 3D space. Let me draw that in a little darker right here. I'm kind of building myself a plane that steps out in front where I can kind of see that thickness a little better. And then I'm going to pull, I notice here I'm actually off center, so I messed up. I should be doing this actually through the center line. That would make a little more sense. Let me try that again. And then I can bring that center line straight forward that distance. It's an axle, right? That minor axis is just coming forward 2 or 3 inches in space. I'm bringing forward kind of this plane and creating a division, and then I'm going to step inward a little bit and create a new tick mark that off of this corner of that plane is a little bit smaller, because that chamfer steps in a good bit. It comes forward, but it steps inward a good bit. It's actually a pretty good angle. In fact, you could even draw it if you wanted to. It's like a contour line. You could draw it right here on that plane, and where that lands ends up being your point. I think that's what I'll do. I'm going to do the same thing over on this side. Now on this side, it stays pretty vertical. Do you see what I'm doing here? Now, Jared might have a different approach to this, and there's 10 different ways to get this geometry, but I'm actually just kind of almost drawing a section view of what that door would look like if I took a bandsaw and cut it in half. I'm like drawing that section view right here on a plane, and the reason I'm doing it is I'm giving myself new tick marks to sketch a new ellipse with. I've got to draw another ellipse, and I'm just trying to get to an area that's offset forward and back. So, same thing again. I'm going to say, all right, that's my new ellipse boundary. Let's draw that. And, okay. And this ellipse is going to be smaller. I'm going to go ahead and start laying it in. The degree is very close to the same, but it's going to be shifted over. Now notice I've exaggerated this. This isn't quite right. Mine's a little bit too small on the bottom here and all that. I can fix that in a minute. I actually hit the degree pretty close, I think. But notice that how it does get thinner. You don't see as much of that door thickness on that right-hand side as what you'll see on the left. Mine's a bit too much, but it's actually good. It kind of exaggerates the point I'm trying to make here. So you end up seeing not as much of this as you do of this. Now the mistake I made actually is I actually lowered my ellipse. My ellipse shifted downward and is not on the same axis as that first ellipse. So that's why mine looks a little bit fat up here at the top. So I'm going to try to fix that and move it up just a little bit. And maybe a little bit bigger. I might have made it a little bit small. So, trying to kind of correct as I go. Now, when I get that pretty close and I see a line I kind of like, I'm going to come in and start to darken that a little bit so that I do kind of follow the right line. So I'm finding the right line around the backside and rolling around. I'm looking at the proportions of that step off, and I probably stepped it off too much. I probably made it a little bit cartoony. Looks like a Mickey Mouse model or something. I can probably work on that a little bit here. I'm also going to come in and start to work on this back line and try to darken this up a little bit and get it looking a little bit more. So again, I'm kind of finding the sweet parts of that sketched in, kind of slightly roughed ellipse, and I'm trying to get it. Remember, it doesn't have any flat spots on it, no footballs, no points. Stays smooth all the way around, and it gets thinner here at the back. Visually, you don't see as much of it. All right, mine's a little thick, a little bit thick, a little exaggerated. I'm going to go back in. I'm going to put those contour lines on there because I think that helps to actually see the contour lines on there. All right. Now at this point, my door is the darkest thing here. I see a lot more of it. Now there's another ellipse that's in the inside of here that you can't see in this particular view, but you would see the thickness of the inside. And again, I can essentially just move that same ellipse on the inside and draw the whole thing there. Now this one you're not going to see the whole of. It's going to cut back to the inside, but it gives depth inside there, gives you thickness inside. All of these share the same minor axis. All of these headed the same direction, and they're all virtually the same degree even. Not though the size of these things is changing, they are pretty much the same degree. So there you go. That's not, it's out of I probably should go in here and actually enlarge the box to actually make the proportions look right, but I'm not going to do that because I'm trying to speed up here, and we're already at 3:30, so I'm already behind. Okay, well, let me do this. I'm going to add a little bit more to this. No, I'm not. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to quickly strike this line over to the other one and get the washer's ellipse. Now, what's going to happen to the ellipse on the washer? We know in our mind that these are the same size doors, right? But what's going to happen to them in perspective? Because these lines are diminishing, the height is going to be smaller. It'll be a smaller ellipse, right, than this one. What's going to happen to the degree of the ellipse, or the degrees of these ellipses when I put them over here? The degrees are going to get smaller. That's right. Because it's moving away from me, it's going to get a little bit thinner, but very slightly, because my perspective here is not super strong. In this case, I'm going to totally wing it. I'm going to very quickly estimate heights. I already have some of this done. I know the points I'm trying to hit. I'm just going to try to hit. The main thing I got to do is my minor axis. Strike that minor axis. Again, it's converging that way. Once again. May have made it too thin. Make it too thin, maybe just a hair. Again, rotate your paper around where you can sight well. It's hard to see these lines sometimes if you're looking at them only one way. I don't like what's happening up here. I feel like I missed it up at the top of this ellipse somehow. Yeah. All right, again, that's the outer boundary of the door. They look almost equivalent because we're seeing it and we know they're supposed to be the same. I'm gonna totally wing it on this one and just try to put that thickness back in there. Again, that's a little thicker. I didn't quite hit my minor axis as well here. Let's see if I could get that going a little better. All right. I just pulled it off, and at this point I'm trying to kind of replicate what I see over on my other one I just drew, and not necessarily, I'm not really playing with the constructions and the offset planes, just trying to get it close. I think I hit this a little thin, feels a little bit too forced thin, and the reason I say that, I'm looking at the thickness, the relative thickness on the edge of this, and it feels a little bit thicker here, and it should actually be thinner because this is further down the line. So I did it a little, exaggerated it a little bit too much. Though I will say I'd rather have gone that direction than the other way. It's somehow, if you're gonna cheat it and make it a little bit incorrect, it looks better to be incorrect with perspective and not working against it. But I gotta say it's a little off. Okay, and once again I can do the angled contour lines. Sometimes that helps kind of see what's going on here. And once again I can do the offset on the inside, following the same thing. I can put a little shade and shadow in there too. Sometimes that helps show things up a little bit more. Though again, I would say be light-handed about it. I know we all like to color. We all like to color. We learned how to color on Sesame Street, and we all like to fill in colors, but avoid the temptation to go too much there. Just enough to show what you're trying to show. All right. A little bit too thin, but I'll live with it. Now, I'm gonna come back really quickly and try to add just a few details to make this look halfway decent. Now, one of the things that kind of is happening here, it happens on the front of these things, is, you know, these front faces have a thickness. There's usually a body, so I'm gonna draw around the corner here, this panel, to kind of illustrate that this is a control panel and then a front piece of steel that's usually formed separately. I'm gonna put a little round there on my front. I like to kick where there's a material change or a panel change. I'm gonna put a little kink right there in my Prismacolor to kind of show that, kind of accentuate that. I'll go on and hit the back side strong here. I don't need, no reason to hide that anymore. And the bottom of that even harder, because it's the ground line. And then there's that little step and turn, which is nice. I'll put a little radius there, and it's gonna come along here, and I'll complete that in a minute. But this is a kind of a front corner, and we'll get into radiusing more later, but a double line, a light double line, tends to look like a radius. And I'm gonna put a little radius on the front top of this just to kind of blend it out. Just make those lines be a little rounded. Let's look at this. There's a knob kind of in the center, directly above the door. Looks like there's an emblem over here to the right, an ellipsoidal emblem. So I'm gonna, looks like Whirlpool or something there. I'm gonna put that emblem there. I'm gonna draw another ellipse that goes to that same, at this point I'm eyeballing it, but the minor axis goes to that same left-hand vanishing point, same thing, even though this is the front control knob's much smaller. Really like that, but something like that. Oh, we have this nice arc that's kind of cut across here on the bottom. That's actually kind of a nice detail. That arc kind of drops just below there, so I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna flip the paper upside down to do that because it's easier for me to draw an arc with the top swing of my fingers. And then when it hits this, it's going to wrap around the corner there and become a flat. When it hits that side, it's different. I'm going to go ahead and hit a little stronger line that shows me the height of this. I'm going to do a little break in that line where that panel change is. We'll roll that front edge. It's amazing what radiuses do. It's little small little radiuses do wonders for making something look a little bit more real, because in real life everything has a radius, no matter how small it is. And I'll put a little bit of a second line right there and a second line right there. Break it again. And now I'm going to come along that back line and go ahead and fill in. So I'm actually kind of finishing the washer. Turn the corner, come back to that. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's getting there. I might go ahead and add a little bit more of a line across here, make sure those kind of match up. Again, sometimes those double lines do a lot to kind of help something look a little more accurate. Okay, now real quickly, I can just add a few of the same features to the to this. I'm going to create a little bit of an offset here, which I already kind of started. Drop down. In fact, these line up fairly closely, so there's not a lot of change here. Just go ahead and drop a line straight down. That's where my notch will be for that. And this switches back and cuts back underneath there, so you would see that break very clearly. It's an important little touch. This is going to come back up to that line, and again, I've got the arc sweeping. If I wanted to hit the tangencies the same, I can do a little construction line that's going to get me there. It was a little too deep, maybe. Put my ground lines in there, darken those up good. Radius it a little bit, make it feel like it has that round corner. Don't want sharp corners on metal, it tends to not be good for children. Or adults for that matter. I'm going to put a double line in here that kind of tells me where the back of that is. And again, it's a minor detail, but just showing the distinctions right there for those lines, those back lines, is really a nice touch. It really tells me where the back corner is. Even though it's not an important detail from a form giving standpoint, it really does tell me where things are. And I'm going to drop that front corner, cut this across. Again, break that line. Look at that little break with that Prismacolor. It's just beautiful right there. That little break makes things look real, or more real. And then that cuts back. Similar method right there. And I guess the dryer has that same dial. That's kind of weird, but we will put that same dial, again, headed to that ellipse, that same vanishing point, strike it through there. And again, the Whirlpool badge, they pretty much are identical. The controls are a little different. Oh, the dryer's got a handle here that's slightly different that I didn't notice. So I will put that in. That is actually, I guess that's the lint. That's probably the lint removal thing, I guess. So I'm going to put that in here. That's actually sighted right just above this. At least makes that look a little different. And I'll put a little harder line on this end of it. I'm going to now come in and hit my last lines really hard, really dark, the most important dark lines. Now when you've got a hole, I don't know if Jared's talked about this yet, how does your 3-line weight work with a hole? Well, it starts out dark and then it blends to light. It actually changes weight across the line. So I'm going to hit the edge with air behind it a lot darker here with this hole than I am on the forward part of this. And then likewise right here, you can do the same thing again. And that works well for your shading too, because you've already started that darker kind of line going on there. Gosh, what else is there? How is this? I'm looking down at it too much. Definitely made this ellipse a little too thin. You can see that. It's not way off, but a little bit, I went a little too far. You see what I'm saying? Also, from a proportion standpoint, I made these bezels a little bit too thick. They're a little cartoony. Could have been a little bit lighter weight in that way. I'm getting up off of this. This is a good thing for you to do too, is to step up kind of off your drawing. When you get down on it too much, sometimes you miss things, and I'm looking at things right here that look not quite right that I can see from standing height a little bit differently. I tell you what's nice too is you put a little reflection here. You know, the great thing about reflections on the floor, like a nice polished laundry room here, reflections always work on a horizontal surface in the vertical dimension. So it's actually really easy for a drawing like this. Your construction lines almost create reflections. I'm just going to accentuate it real lightly. This would be construction line method. I'm going to actually use a little bit of light shade hatching, vertical hatching here, and do kind of an irregular length, you know, a little bit of an irregular length, and just kind of work your way real lightly, vertical, change the length slightly so that it looks like you're not trying to actually render something. You're just kind of showing, hey, there's a floor there, and then stop it right at that edge. That gives me a nice little look of reflectivity, right? And if I wanted to get cute, I could come in here and actually add a little, wouldn't hurt to add a little shadow in this back corner, or in between the two, to kind of set one off a little from the other, because you would technically have a little darker shadow in there. Same thing along the top here. This would actually be a little bit darker. And obviously there's a big black hole inside there that I could shade, but I actually would resist the urge, because you'll end up creating this big black blob right in the middle that ends up being distracting, probably isn't going to work for you. Could, but I would avoid it. I would actually spend my time trying to kind of give a little bit of value to the washer itself and make it pop rather than the void inside the washer. What else is there? Are we there? It is 15 minutes longer than I thought. I'm not terribly happy with my bezels. Jared could have hit those better. Jared does this drawing really well in pen and ink. This is kind of the first time I've played with it, but your proportions on your bezels are better than mine. If you hit your bezels a little bit thinner, than mine, you're probably on track, because mine are a little bit too thick. Oh, that ellipse is bugging me. It's like I'm wanting to do some work here to fix that. I don't know if I can maybe fudge it a little bit right here. All right,